How many iconic theme song references can DuckTales fit into one episode?
Here in Duckburg, life is like a hurricane.
Okay, that's a pretty good start, but why don't we throw a little mystery on this? And you know what? Let's rewrite some history.
Someone stole my time tub and destroyed time and space!
There we go, a hurricane in Duckburg, with a mystery underneath it, with time travel involved, so you're rewriting history. Let's throw in a reference to the 1987 DuckTales with a classic beloved character, and why not make some major characters learn a lesson along the way? Let's do this. This is Timephoon. For most of its 2-season run so far, DuckTales has struck a pretty good balance between a couple of type of episodes. One type where the family goes on a grand adventure through the world, exploring different places and cultures and things, and another that's a little bit more of a bottle episode, something that takes place locally in Duckburg, or most specifically in McDuck Manor. This episode, Timephoon, does both, putting the family through a big adventure that goes across multiple cultures and time periods and places in the world without ever leaving the mansion. It's a journey through history, but not the kind of journey of history that you would find at your local library through books, but something much more literal. In fact, it's a plot that's kind of difficult to explain. So let's let the Duckburg news take over.
The El Pato storm has merged with a terrifying time vortex that local reporters are calling a Timephoon. The Timephoon has unsurprisingly localized itself above McDuck Manor.
That sounds like a pretty crazy plot to begin with, but like most episodes of DuckTales, the plot is more secondary to what's going on with the characters. In fact, a lot of Season 2 has been far less story-driven as far as what the larger plot of the season is, and far more focused on our characters and them getting to know each other and growing closer together. And true to the form of that character development, a lot of the episodes in this season have been focusing on Della Duck and her relationships with the kids in the family. We've seen her bond with Dewey over their boundless sense of adventure, Huey over being nerdy and needing to overcome being afraid of danger, and Della's even bonded with Webby, who's not actually her child, but someone that can use that parental influence. This episode presents Della with her most difficult parenting challenge yet. Not only because this time she's learning a little bit more about how to interact with the problem child of the family, the evil triplet in Louie, but also how to actually be a disciplinary parent. We'll get more to that in a second, but it suffices to say that it has a lot to do with the reason there's a time travel storm swirling over McDuck Manor. In Louie's quest to idolize Scrooge McDuck and become like him, become one of the richest ducks in the world, he's always cracking cockamamie schemes. And this time, that scheme is time travel. He's taken Gyro Gearless's time tub and has created a new division of Louie Inc.
Borrowing Gyro's time tub here, the keen minds at Louie Incorporated can track down famous lost treasures at the exact moment before they were lost.
Louie Inc.'s Time Treasures is actually a sort of brilliant play on time travel. If things were lost to time, one must wonder, how were they lost? Maybe time travelers took them, and that's why they were lost in the first place. And there's a lot of profit to be had in time travel treasure hunting. There's also a lot of mistakes to be had, too. Gyro Gearloose may be a genius, but his inventions don't always work perfectly. And it turns out the time tub has a habit of pulling things along with it in its wake. With every treasure Louie brings back to the future, he brings something else along with him, including this.
I've reconstructed some rudimentary cave duck language. Ooh, ooga.
Bubba.
It's kind of a bold move to put Bubba in the new series, because in the original 1987 DuckTales, he was considered one of the more contentious characters. The idea of Bubba Duck was always silly, reaching into the past and pulling out a cave duck and bringing him into the real world. A strange Encino Man sort of storyline just in the middle of the duck world. And it never really fit. But it could have been fun, and sometimes in the original series it was fun. But it was also off-putting, because it was clear that the original DuckTales series really wanted people to like this character, to the point that Bubba had his own theme song.
Bubba hits the rocks with a
Bubba Clubba.
Bubba takes a bath in a
Bubba Tubba.
Bubba likes to eat his.
Bubba Grubba.
The way the show forced Bubba onto the audience in the original series was so jarring, it kind of took you out of the story, even though those episodes were intentionally very silly. But despite that base that Bubba comes from, DuckTales 2017, the modern DuckTales, somehow managed to not only take all that silliness and integrate it in a fun way, but in a way that makes it work, not feeling out of place, like it's completely and properly integrated into the storyline. Bubba doesn't just show up and become their friends, he's somewhat of an antagonist for Huey, who's trying to study cave ducks and figure out how they really work, but has encountered this duck who doesn't fit the mold. At the same time, he's perfectly fun and off the wall and silly enough to get the excitement of Dewey and Webby, excitement that transfers over to the viewer. This version of Bubba even calls back to that ridiculous song, taking the lyrics from one of the more absurd sequences in that musical number and making them part of Bubba's interactions with his environment in a series of just clips that I love.
Bubba Grubba. Bubba Chubba. Bubba Flubba. Bubba Clubba.
I hate this.
Not only is all this Bubba nonsense a fun callback for fans of the original 1987 DuckTales, he's actually integral to the plot of the episode. Bubba is the story's first inclination that something is going wrong with the time travel, and the example of how it's going wrong. People and things from the past being pulled into the present. At first, this forms the core mystery of the episode. Nobody knows why this time travel is happening, except for Louie, who's immediately trying to hide his scheme of Louie Incorporated's time treasures. But like a lot of things that happen with the Duck family, things quickly start to get out of hand. In fact, things getting out of hand and small problems turning into big problems is the core point of this episode. Because while most of the story is driving to the point of showing Louie making a mistake and Louie needing to learn a lesson, the show is actually about someone else needing to learn a lesson. One of my favorite things about Season 2 so far has been showing the growth of Della as a mother. Because she missed out on so much of her kids' lives, she's basically just starting with motherhood just now with a bunch of 10-year-old kids. And that means she doesn't really know what she's doing. Knowing Della, that just means she's been way too laid back, and Mrs. Beakley spends a good part of the episode trying to teach her that sometimes being a parent means putting limits on your child. But Della is convinced that you just have to let kids be kids and not sweat the small stuff. That's a nice, relaxed idea to parenting, but when things come to a head, it's a little deficient, and Della starts to realize that maybe she did need to keep a better eye on her children and what they were doing, and what could possibly go wrong with an extremely loose parenting style. And I think that's my favorite thing about the episode, because although it seems like it's about Louie, it's really about Della. Of course, to get to how it's about Della, we need to get a little more detail about Louie, and exactly how he screwed up. Not only has his time travel dragged people from the past into the present, it's also malfunctioning and zapping people from the present back into the past, hurtling the Duck family back into time. This all comes to a head as the family is battling all of the displaced time people and all get thrown back in time, leaving Louie alone with the time tub in the foyer as he uses I don't know how he does it, but he manages to reconfigure the time tub to send everyone back to the past. But he's still alone, and he realizes for a brief moment that he may have finally screwed up in a way that can't be fixed. And for a brief moment, it's terrifying. Louie's carelessness hasn't just caused a big mess, but potentially destroyed his family, making them lost to time forever. But before that fact can fully sink in, the status quo seems to reset itself. And this is where the episode really comes together, because as everyone zaps in, it seems like the story's just going to resolve itself in any way a cartoon typically does. The crisis is averted, the status quo is reset, the mischievous one, Louie, apologizes, and everyone is happy, and everything goes back to normal. But that's not actually what happens. Instead, Louie tries to get away with it. He apologizes, we think they're gonna move on, but someone steps forward and says, it's not okay.
Your little scheme to bypass the present almost cost us our future. This all stops now. You are grounded. No schemes, no treasures, and Louie Incorporated is done. Understand?
Della finally steps up and becomes a parent. The line has been crossed. Louie has been too reckless, and the consequences of his actions are just too great to let this slide with an apology. And while this is a big change from everything simply being reset at the end, and Louie being grounded is a huge plot point that's going to set in motion a lot of what's going to happen for the rest of the season through the finale, it's not actually his grounding that makes this episode special. It's the fact that it's Della grounding him. Della has stepped up to make the hard call as a parent, and it portrays it not as something any parent would do, but something that was very hard for Della to do. I think that's important, because in media, adults and parents are often portrayed as already knowing all the answers and being good at being a parent. So having a flawed mother, a flawed parent like Della, means a lot. In fact, showing Della collapsing under the weight of the responsibility, under how hard it was to be the bad guy and ground her kid, I think is extremely important, because a lot of kids watching these shows, when I watched these shows as a kid, you often didn't appreciate that when your parents would ground you or punish you for something, they didn't enjoy it. It was one of the hardest things they had to do. And I think it's not very often in these cartoons that we see that side of parenthood. And so getting to see Della go through the turmoil of saying that was really hard to do, to punish her kid, to show that it's grief for her to do it, but that she knows it's important so she'll have a better son, is something we don't see in cartoons a lot. And I think it informs us who Della is as a person and what parenting is like for kids who are wondering why their parents might punish them, or other adults who need a character in the show to relate to about, yeah, my job as a parent is really hard. It's not at all what I expected out of this episode. And although I really enjoyed this episode for the time travel and for Louie and for everything it set up, showing the hard part about being a parent wasn't something I ever expected to see from DuckTales.
Launchpad, you okay?
I went to the future. I've seen how the world ends.
Yeah, it was neat. See you there soon.
That's what I normally expect from DuckTales. Funny, foreboding, weird. And we'll get to all that really soon. The next few episodes are all about wrapping up the major story of DuckTales Season 2. And pretty much all of them tie to this episode. Louie being grounded, Louie's ambition, and how that kind of wraps up into a much bigger problem than anticipated. But that's it for this review. As always, thanks for watching and putting up with these various delays. I will continue to put these episodes out as soon as I can as we ramp up to the mysterious incoming date of DuckTales Season 3. Until then, as always, thanks for being a great audience. Thanks for watching, and as always, take it easy out there, Internet.